Wren Calloway spat dust and blood onto the boards of the dueling pit and didn't bother wiping her mouth. Her shoulder was dislocated. Her ribs felt cracked. But she was still on her feet, and the man who'd tried to put her in the ground wasn't. The crowd packed into the stands of Cinderline's fighting pit roared like a rock slide. Hundreds of settlers, prospectors, and rail workers had bet everything they had on this match. Most of them had bet against her. She'd won anyway. Wren looked down at the man sprawled in the dirt. Garrick Thane, the meanest gun for hire this side of the territory line, undefeated in the pit for 3 years running. Undefeated until today. The pit was fenced with iron and soaked with old blood from 100 fights before this one. Some of that blood on the ground now was hers, running down from a cut above her eyebrow. Her right arm hung wrong at her side where Thane's last blow had landed, but she was breathing. He wasn't moving. A bell rang 3 times from the announcer's platform. The crowd's roar dropped to a low murmur. Wren knew what came next. She'd watched other pit winners stand right where she was standing now. The reward. Up on the balcony overlooking the pit, in a chair carved from black desert oak, sat Marshal General Corliss Vane. He ran Cinderline the way a king runs a kingdom. The law, the mines, the rail line, all of it answered to him. A deputy stepped to the balcony rail, and his voice carried across the pit through a brass speaking horn. "The winner has proven herself," the deputy called out. "She has defeated our champion fair and square. By the old pit code, she has earned her reward." Wren had heard about this part. Winners of the Cinderline pit didn't just get prize money. Sometimes it was land deeds, sometimes it was a share of the rail concession. For a bounty hunter, the Marshal General had something else in mind. 2 figures were marched into the pit under guard, wrists bound in iron. Wren's stomach turned when she saw who they were. The first was a woman built like a fence post. Tall, wiry, with a scar cutting clean across her jaw and eyes that hadn't blinked once since she'd walked in. She wore a torn deputy's coat, stripped of its badge. A bounty tag hung from a cord around her neck. Wanted, dead or alive, 400 silver. The second was a boy who couldn't have been older than 17, thin as a rail spike, staring at his own boots like he was trying to disappear into them. His tag read, "Wanted, alive only, 150 silver." "These 2 were captured in last month's raid on the Blackwater line," the deputy announced. "The woman is Sable Ruiz, former territorial deputy turned outlaw, wanted for the ambush at Coldridge. The boy is Eli Marsh, wanted for aiding her escape. By right of the pit, the winner may claim either bounty as her prize, to collect, to ransom, or to see delivered to whatever justice she sees fit." Wren felt sick to her stomach. She'd hunted bounties for 6 years. She knew exactly what whatever justice she sees fit meant in Cinderline. It meant she could shoot them both right here in the dirt and collect the silver on the spot, and nobody in this crowd would blink. She looked at Sable. The woman met her eyes without flinching, the look of someone who'd already made peace with dying and just wanted to get it over with on her own terms. She looked at the boy. His shoulders were shaking. He hadn't looked up once. The crowd began to chant low and ugly, hungry to see which bounty she'd collect first. Wren had taken this pit fight because the Marshal General's silver was the only thing standing between her and losing her homestead to a rail company buyout. She needed the money bad. But she'd built her whole reputation on one rule. She brought bounties in alive whenever the law allowed it, and she never, ever took a kill for sport. She thought about her father, a lawman before her, who used to say the badge didn't mean much if you started deciding who deserved to breathe. That was the whole job, bringing people to a fair judge, not being the judge yourself. She looked at Sable again. A woman like that, hard as nails, might know things about the Marshal General's operation that could be worth more than any bounty. She looked at the boy. He looked like he'd break if she raised her voice at him, but maybe that was exactly why she couldn't leave him here either. "The winner must choose," the deputy said, raising a hand for quiet. "The code demands it. Name your prize." Wren walked slow across the pit floor, her boots stirring up dust that hung gold in the afternoon light. The whole crowd had gone dead silent, quiet enough to hear her spurs. She stopped a few feet from both prisoners. She'd made her decision. It wasn't the one anyone in that crowd was expecting. She turned her back on both of them and looked straight up at the Marshal General's balcony. "I'm not collecting either bounty." The words dropped into the silence like a stone down a well. Nobody moved. Even the Marshal General went still, one hand frozen halfway to his glass of whiskey. Wren stood alone in the center of the pit, two condemned strangers behind her. A whole town's worth of eyes locked on her. And somewhere up on that balcony, a man who ran this territory like his own private kingdom was trying to figure out what she'd just done to his rules. The real fight hadn't even started yet. The silence broke apart in seconds. It felt a lot longer than that. The crowd exploded into arguing, confused shouting, half the town turning to each other trying to make sense of what they'd just watched. This didn't happen. Winners always collected. Up on the balcony, Marshal General Vane rose slowly from his chair. Even from the pit floor, Wren could see the surprise on his face curdle fast into something colder. The deputy at the rail looked between Wren and the Marshal General, clearly unsure what he was supposed to do with a bounty hunter who wouldn't take her bounty. "You don't get to decline," the deputy called down, voice sharp. "Pit code is clear. The winner collects." "Where I come from," Wren shouted back, loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. "A bounty's supposed to go before a judge, not get shot in a dirt pit for entertainment. I won't collect either of these two like that." The murmuring split into two camps fast. Some of the crowd looked offended, cheated out of a show. Others looked like they were leaning in closer, curious what a fool this stubborn was going to do next. Vane made a short gesture. The deputy nodded and called down again. "Refusing the pit code is an insult to Marshal General Vane's authority. The penalty is forfeiture of your hunting license and your standing bounty claims across the territory, permanent. But the Marshal General is a generous man. He offers you one more chance. Collect a bounty or lose your trade for good." Wren had figured this was coming. Vane didn't let anybody walk out of his pit clean. But she had an angle, a dangerous one. It might not work. "And what happens to the two of them?" she called out. "If I say no again?" The deputy paused, glancing up at the balcony. After a long beat, he answered, "Both bounties will be collected in full, immediately, by whatever means the Marshal General decides." Sable's jaw went tight. Eli flinched hard enough that his chains rattled. Wren nodded slow. This was exactly the answer she'd been hoping to hear. "I want a private word with the Marshal General," she called out. "I've got information about the Blackwater rail heist he's been trying to pin down for 2 years. Something worth a whole lot more than 2 bounty tags." The pit went dead quiet. Everybody in Cinderline knew about the Blackwater job, a rail shipment that had vanished without a trace, and no bounty hunter in the territory had ever tracked down where it went. Up on the balcony, Vane leaned forward, studying her the way a man studies a card table he suspects is rigged against him. After a long, muttered exchange with his men, he finally answered through the deputy. "The Marshal General will grant you a private audience, but be warned. If your information turns out to be worthless, you'll lose more than your license." Guards marched Wren and the 2 prisoners out of the pit, through the mining company's back corridors, up into the polished offices where the Marshal General actually ran his territory. Glass lamps instead of oil lanterns, rugs shipped in from the capital. Everything built to remind visitors exactly how much money ran through Cinderline. Finally, they reached Vane's private office at the top of the rail depot tower, windows looking out over the whole desert basin. "So," Vane said without turning around, "the bounty hunter who won't collect. Wren Calloway. Licensed hunter, 6 years working this territory. And you claim to know where the Blackwater shipment ended up." "I do. But first I want to understand something. Why do you care so much who ends up owning a couple bounty tags? Why not just pay me in silver and call it done?" Vane allowed himself something close to a smile. "Because I've heard stories about hunters like you. Stories that say you people care more about a fair trial than you do about the silver in your own pocket. I wanted to see if it was true." Wren felt the floor tilt a little even though it hadn't moved at all. This whole thing had been a test from the start. "And what did you learn?" "That hunters are either remarkably principled," Vane said, "or remarkably foolish. Maybe both. Sit. Tell me about the shipment." Wren sat. Sable and Eli were made to kneel nearby, deputies posted at every door. "What I know," she said carefully, "is going to change how you run this territory. But I need your word on what happens to these two." Vane laughed, short and unimpressed. "You're not exactly in a position to make demands. Maybe not. But what I know about who really hit that Blackwater shipment is worth a lot more than 2 bounty tags. And if you have me thrown off this tower, you never find out." His smile dropped. He studied her with new interest. "Talk, and hope it's worth what you're asking." Wren took a breath. Everything hung on the next few minutes. She started describing a conspiracy that didn't exist, rail workers who'd never met each other, a fence operation running out of a town 3 counties over, a cache of stolen goods buried at coordinates she made up on the walkover. All lies, but stitched together with enough real detail about how rail heists actually worked that it sounded earned instead of guessed. Vane listened close. He asked sharp questions. She answered everyone with the flat, easy confidence of a woman who'd spent 6 years reading outlaws for a living. "Interesting," he said when she finished. "But why hand this to me instead of collecting the bounty on it yourself?" This was the question she'd been steering toward the whole conversation. "Because I've been doing this long enough to know how it actually works," she said. "Independent hunters don't last against a man with your reach. I'd rather be useful to you than dead trying to outrun you. You'd be working for me. I'd be being realistic, and I want payment in a form your ledger will actually approve, both of them." She nodded toward Sable and Eli. "Not one, both." Sable's eyes snapped up, burning. Eli looked lost, unsure what was happening around him. "The pit code allows 1 bounty," Vane said. "You'd need me to make an exception. You're the Marshal General. Make it. When I ride back into the territory with a former deputy turned outlaw and her accomplice working under my flag, everybody's going to know exactly whose side I've landed on. Nobody will trust me again, except you." Vane went quiet a long moment, turning the offer over. Wren was betting everything that he'd see the logic of it. A hunter with no way back to her old reputation was a hunter who had to stay loyal. "Clever," he finally said. "If what you're saying holds up, you'd have no path back to independent work. You'd need me." "Exactly. My whole future runs through you from here." Vane looked at the 2 prisoners, then back at her, then at the false coordinates scratched on the paper between them. "Fine. Both. In exchange, you bring me the Blackwater cache yourself and you report to my office every 30 days. Your horse and your gear get a tracking brand. If your information turns out false or if you disappear, I won't just pull your license. I'll have every hunter in the territory come looking for you." "Understood." As the deputies moved to escort them out, Vane spoke once more, quiet enough that only she'd hear it. "Don't think for 1 second I believe your little performance, Calloway. I know exactly what you're doing, but it works fine for me either way. When you ride back into town with 2 bounties working your ranch instead of hanging from a rope, it'll remind every outlaw in this territory exactly what happens when they cross me instead of joining me." Something cold settled in Wren's chest. He knew. And somehow it didn't change a thing for him. "Get them ready to ride," Vane ordered. "And Calloway, I'll be watching everything you do." The horses and wagon Vane's men handed over were solid enough. 1 covered wagon, 3 horses, and a lockbox bolted to the wagon frame that Wren was fairly sure held more than just supplies. It held a listening rig, the kind rail companies used to keep tabs on their cargo. Sable rode with her wrists still bound. Eli walked beside the wagon, collar shy and silent. Sable watched Wren with open hatred from the first mile. Eli watched her with quiet, worn-out fear, waiting for the moment her patience ran out. Wren knew she had to move careful. The listening rig would catch every word she said. Show her hand too early, and Vane's men would ride her down before she ever reached open territory. Wait too long, and Sable might do something none of them could take back. "Those cuffs look like they hurt," Wren said the first night, keeping her voice flat and businesslike. "For the rig." Sable didn't answer. Eli rubbed at his own bound wrists, but said nothing either. Wren pulled a key from her boot and unlocked both sets of cuffs, letting them fall into the dirt. "Don't get any clever ideas about running," she said loud enough for the rig to catch. "We're 2 days from the nearest town in any direction. There's nowhere to go." But underneath the words, she hoped they'd notice she hadn't needed to unlock them at all. For 3 days, Wren played the part the rig expected. She gave orders, kept her distance, never once raised a hand to either of them, and made sure they ate proper meals and slept somewhere better than tied to a wagon wheel. Sable grew more restless by the day. She was a fighter, built for action, and Wren never gave her a clean shot at anything. When she tried to lift a skinning knife from the supply crate, Wren simply took it back without a fight. Eli, meanwhile, started to loosen up. He began asking real questions about the route, about where they were actually headed. Careful questions, testing the ground. On the 4th night, Sable made her move. She came at Wren near the campfire with a sharpened tent stake, moving with the quiet precision of someone who'd survived worse than a bounty tag. Wren barely rolled clear in time. They grappled hard in the firelight for several minutes, Sable faster, meaner, angrier, until Wren finally twisted the stake free and stepped back, hands raised, empty. "I'm not your enemy," she said quiet. "You bought me like cattle," Sable spat. "How's that not exactly what an enemy does?" "Things aren't always what they look like," Wren said. She knew the rig was listening. She had to pick her next words with care. "Sometimes you gotta look like you're doing the wrong thing to actually pull off the right one." Sable's eyes narrowed, but she didn't come at her again. 2 nights later, Eli found the listening rig's 2nd unit hidden under the wagon seat. When he showed her, Wren wasn't surprised. "Course they're listening," she said, "for the recording. I'm carrying information worth a fortune back to the Marshal General. He wants to be sure I don't just ride off with it. I do." But that night, in the one blind spot behind the wagon, she found Eli pretending to check the horses. "There's another one under the water barrel," he whispered. "Maybe more I haven't found." "Keep looking," she whispered back. "But don't touch 'em. If they go quiet, Vane's men will come asking why." "Why do you need to know where they all are?" "'Cause eventually we're going to need to know exactly what they can and can't hear." Eli stared at her in the dark. "You're not what you're pretending to be." "No, I really ain't." From that night on, Eli worked with her instead of against her, playing his part clean whenever the rig had a clear ear on them. Sable took longer. She tried twice more, once with a broken bottle, once while Wren slept. Each time, Wren defended herself without ever striking back. After the 3rd try, Sable cornered her behind the wagon with a real blade this time. "I'd rather die," she said, "than work off a bounty for a woman who owns me." Wren looked up at her and, instead of drawing her own gun, knelt in the dirt. "If you gotta do it, then do it," she said. "But first, take this." She held out a small brass key. "It's for the tracking brand on your saddle. You're free the second you pull it off." Sable stared at the key. "Why in hell would you give me this?" "'Cause a person ought to get to choose their own road, even if that road ends with me dead." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The blade stayed raised. The key sat waiting in Wren's open palm. "You ain't what you seem," Sable finally said. "No, and neither's where we're headed." Sable lowered the blade, slow, and took the key instead. "I won't kill you tonight," she said. "But I'll be watching. If this is some kind of trick, if you're actually going to work us like property, I'll finish this myself. Wouldn't expect nothing less from you." As Sable walked off with the key to her own tracking brand in hand, Wren wondered if she'd just made an ally or signed her own death warrant. 2 days out from the territorial capital, the trail dust on the horizon meant only one thing: a patrol. Sable and Eli rode together now, something that would have seemed impossible a week back. Over the trail, the two of them had built a shaky trust neither expected, and both had come to understand, slow and careful, that their captor wasn't who Vane thought she was. 2 nights earlier, Wren had quietly buried the last 3 listening units under a rock outside camp, long enough to tell them everything. The false Blackwater coordinates, the deal with Vane, the promise that the second they reached the capital, they'd both walk free. You risked your whole license, your whole life, and for two strangers, Sable had said. 'Cause it was the right thing to do, Wren answered. 'Cause nobody deserves to be somebody's property just for having a price on their head. That's the whole reason I took up this trade in the first place. Bringing folks to a fair judge, not being the judge myself. Now, riding into view on the trail ahead, a column of territorial marshals sat waiting, rifles slung but not raised. "Unregistered wagon," the lead rider called out. "This is Deputy Marshal Hale of the Territorial Guard. Identify yourselves and state your business." Wren knew Vane's listening rig had gone quiet, but she couldn't be sure what had made it back to him already. She chose her words with care. Wren Calloway, licensed bounty hunter, riding in from Cinderline with information about the Blackwater rail heist that Marshal General Vane's been sitting on for 2 years. The deputy's eyes narrowed. "You're riding with 2 live bounty tags and no chains on either one. Reassigned to my custody under Cinderline's pit code," Wren said. "But there's more to it than that, and I think you'll want to hear it away from Vane's ears." Deputy Marshal Hale studied her a long moment. Something in her tone had snagged his attention. The careful way she'd said away from Vane's ears. "Fine, we'll hear you out. But I'll need to speak with your 2 passengers separate first. Standard procedure for anybody riding in off a bounty claim." Wren nodded. She couldn't object without looking guilty of something. Hale spent half an hour alone with Sable and Eli by the wagon. They told him everything: the pit code, the bounty auction dressed up as justice, and exactly how Wren had treated them since the moment she'd turned her back on both their bounty tags. "She never hurt us," Eli said. "Took our cuffs off inside a day, fed us proper, let us sleep. She could have let me gut her," Sable added. "Instead, she handed me the key to my own tracking brand. Ain't nobody who actually wants to own a person does a thing like that." When Hale walked back to the wagon, he had the whole picture. "Your 2 passengers are coming with us for processing," he told Wren. "Full territorial hearing, both bounties reviewed under proper law. Given what I just heard about how Cinderline's been running that pit, I expect Vane's got a lot more explaining to do than you do." "Understood," Wren said, for whoever might still be listening. "I've got no more use for them anyway." But her eyes said something different entirely. They said goodbye to 2 people who'd trusted her with their lives when they'd had every reason not to. 4 months later, Wren stood in the Territorial Capital's courthouse, giving testimony alongside marshals from 3 different counties. Sable and Eli sat beside her, bounties dismissed, records cleared, both of them now sworn witnesses in a corruption case against Marshal General Corliss Vane. The false Blackwater coordinates had sent Vane's own men chasing a shipment that never existed clear across 2 counties, wasting weeks and exposing how deep his rail-skimming operation actually ran. More than that, Sable and Eli's testimony, backed by a dozen other bounty tags that had never seen a fair trial, cracked open a pit code trafficking scheme Vane had been running out of Cinderline for the better part of a decade. The territorial governor stripped Vane of his badge and his rail concessions on the spot. He'd stand trial for it come spring. Outside the courthouse, Sable waited in a deputy marshal's coat. She'd taken a commission helping track down other bounties collected unfairly under the old pit code. Eli had been hired on with the Territorial Records Office, tracing every falsified bounty tag Vane's operation had ever issued. "So what now?" Sable asked. "Now we go find the rest of them," Wren said. "There's still bounty tags out there that never should have been issued in the first place." Eli smiled. "I already found 9 more towns still running pit codes just like Cinderline's." "Then that's where we start," Wren said. Sable grinned, the same fierce grin that had once been aimed at Wren's throat. "Good. Was hoping you'd say that." The 3 of them rode out of the capital together, back toward open country, not as hunter and bounty this time, but as a crew. Wren thought about the choice she'd made in that pit, months back. She'd been offered 2 bounties and collected neither. Instead, she'd chosen something Vane never once accounted for. She'd chosen to leave nobody behind in chains. The sun dropped low over the desert as the 3 of them rode west, out past the last of the territory's fences, 3 riders heading into open country, not chasing a reward this time, but chasing everyone still waiting to be found.
Listen, if you enjoyed the story, please hit the subscribe button and like the video and share it to friends and family. That means a lot for us.